Hi, friends. This is Donniel Hartman and Yossi Klein Halevi. This is Israel and Ceasefire, if that's exactly where we are right now. It's hard to tell. And today's day 488, in which still 79 hostages are still not home. And today's episode is being sponsored by my dear friend and one of the more vibrant learners at the Institute. Someone who always wants to learn and know, my friend Nancy Connors. And Nancy, this podcast and last week's podcast are shaped very deeply by Donald Trump. Last week it was Prime Minister Trump, and this week we're calling it Trump's Dystopia. So if any apologies necessary, this is our world though. And but I so much appreciate your support for the podcast and for enabling us to do what it is that we do, and that is to talk and to try to make sense of what has been a very, very difficult, strange, and challenging time. So thank you, Nancy. And Trump's Dystopia, we woke up for it. I know personally, I got up at about 2:15, and I said, oh, is there anything reported? Because we had postponed yesterday's podcast because we had a feeling.
I got up at 1, had the same experience, looked at the news, and couldn't go back to sleep.
Yeah, I finished the press conference, and I felt like everything had moved and changed. And I also couldn't go back to sleep. And I saw I wasn't going to go. And so I have sleeping pills for jet lag. I took a sleeping pill. So it was the only way I could go back to sleep. I was like,
this is the political equivalent of jet lag.
I was literally, it's like being punched around, like my mind, like what's going on here? What's changed? Now, it was a very strange feeling, even though last night I didn't feel it as much, but it was like there was a deep ambivalence that I had because as I'm hearing this fantasy, we're calling this a dystopia, but as I'm hearing this fantasy, I'm saying, I could wake up and open my eyes, and Gaza is gone. There's nobody wants to kill me.
That was a deep Israeli place in you speaking.
A place what? Like everybody, and it's natural.
Yeah.
And by the way, as Palestinian citizens of Israel, also, they're not Zionists. If they could wake up and Israel was gone, you don't. But here, someone put this dream, all my problems, they weren't dreaming for us to come home. And I came home and okay, if I woke up and someone's articulating it. And then as you're thinking about it,
not just someone, the president of the United
States. That's true. I forgot it's not just somebody very significant in shaping our lives. What does this mean for our future? And part of me knew this is not going to happen. First of all, the whole world is trying to figure out Donald Trump, and I think he likes it that way. Is he just the crazy guy? Does he throw out ideas? What is he doing? I'm going to leave the analysis of Donald Trump. I don't think anybody's figured it out, and it's certainly beyond my pay grade. But as I'm sitting there, yes, we're going to send them to 1, 2, or 12 different places, and they're going to have a wonderful life, and it's just going to be great, and this is going to be the new French Riviera for the world, and it's I could see it's a real estate deal, and this is insane. Really? But I couldn't put it away, and I couldn't put it aside. Neither can the world. Because something profound is changing. And forget the implementation of the deal, and maybe later on we'll talk practicality. But before practicality, there's so many more things that we need to talk about. How is this impacting on our lives, our understanding, our vision, our plans? What does this do? What did it do to you? What's the gut feeling that when you heard this story, whether you thought it was implementable or not?
I have to tell you, though, Donniel, when you first suggested that we postpone recording this episode by a day so that we could respond to the press conference, I didn't say this to you, but I thought, he's exaggerating. What could possibly come out of this press conference? Maybe there'll be some announcement about the hostages, Maybe Trump and Netanyahu will bury the hatchet, And whoa, that was my first thought. Wow, Donniel, you called this one. And I felt overwhelmed by ambivalence and chaos. I was in a chaotic emotional state. And that press conference is what happens when you insert Mr. Chaos into the Middle East. Because that's the essence, in a way, of Trump's second term, seems to be generating as much chaos as possible.
We should be, by the way, a little more empathetic to all our friends in North America. Because, we hear it and we read about it. But we've experienced what they've been experiencing since our prime minister, but he's also their president, has been changing the order of the universe.
But what makes it, of course, so complicated for us, and you touched on this earlier, is that whatever he's saying and doing, he's doing because he thinks this is good for us. He's doing it as a friend. And so part of my deep ambivalence is this feeling of being torn. And so when I try to just very quickly unpack the elements here, first I have to tell you, hearing the President of the United States speak so warmly about the heroism and resilience of our young people, of our soldiers, after a year and a half of hearing them being called Nazis from every direction, and even Biden, who was really, really a friend, didn't go that extra step and embrace our kids. And that meant emotionally, I was so moved by that, just on that simple level. And I felt this gratitude to him for saying that, for acknowledging, for recognizing that. And the second thing is this deep sense of gratitude that I felt to him for pulling the U.S. out of these international bodies that have declared war against Israel. He's pulling the U.S. out of the UN Human Rights Council. The Human Rights Council routinely denounces Israel more often than all other countries combined. Now that's pathological. Trump is stopping funding to UNRWA. One of our hostages who was just released, Emily Damari, said the other day she was held captive in an UNRWA facility. So we're dealing with such profound levels of corruption. And Trump is calling these institutions out. So I felt what every Israeli felt watching this. This guy is protecting us. Then we come to Gaza. I felt the ghost of Mayor Kahana hovering and smiling in that press conference.
Wow.
And my own personal background here, the baggage that I bring to this, is that, as you know, and I've mentioned it on the podcast, when I was a teenager, I was in the Jewish Defense League, and Mayor Kahana was my leader, my hero. And I joined the JDL because of Soviet Jewry. And I left Kahana when he started talking about transfer of Palestinians. I walked out, and so did most of my friends, and I never spoke to him again. This was in 1973. And now there he was, the President of the United States, advocating a policy which until that moment was beyond the pale of the Israeli mainstream. I mean, it's penetrated, thanks to Itamar Ben-Gvir, it's penetrated mainstream politics, but still, for most of Israeli discourse, it's beyond the pale. And now Benny Gantz, one of the heads of the opposition, embraced the Trump doctrine, which is the Kahana doctrine. And so when we talk about ambivalence and disorientation, I don't know what to do with this.
By the time I woke up from my sleeping pill, I was able to analyze, because part of what I was feeling in the nighttime is I didn't even understand what was happening to me. I was just in this tizzy and chaotic spin and mixed emotions. By the time I woke up, I realized the impact of this speech on Israeli society. And as the days progressed and as I'm walking through the various numerous articles, there's articles all over the place that this is not going to happen. It's almost self-evident already. Where are they going to go? Who's going to take that? It's like this is one of Trump's things. But one of the roles that the United States has in Israeli society, and it's the only country in the world that plays that role for us, is to be our loving critic. And Michael Walzer says to be a critic, you have to be an insider. Well, we feel that the United States is an insider. And they're the only ones who are allowed to criticize Israel. Everybody else who criticize us, they're our enemies, and then we just end up calling them anti-Semites. They always were, and they still are. Look, see. And as a result, we have nobody who challenges what we do. The classic conversation in Israel and in the United States is of a moral, shared vision of the world. Our relationship is not just interest, it's not just security. We share values. And one of America's jobs is that life in the Middle East is really, really hard. And survival is one of your first on the Maslow hierarchies. That's what you got to think about. And America's the one which says, there's a higher self. Israel, you too have to live in accordance with some principles of international law and humanity and liberal values. And they're our critic, and we aggravate and fetch about it. But that's America's place. And a major part of America is to be the supporter of the country, the protector, whether it's with a veto or whether it's with arms. And we know that part of that is going to be that we have to listen to a conversation about who we ought to be. It's there, it's a given in part of that relationship. So when Donald Trump says transfer of 1.8 million people and we're going to build here the most beautiful thing, it's going to be great. It's people of the world, but we're going to transfer 1.8 million and we should do it. It's good for them because Gaza is no longer a place which is healthy for any human being. And they'll go and they'll be in different places and we'll build there something very, very beautiful and they'll have a beautiful life. When he says that, what he's basically done, he's not a moral critic. He's not even thinking in moral categories. I don't think he's had a moral category. His calculations, for him now, it sounded just like this was some real estate deal. But when he says it, for Israeli society, that becomes moral permission. And when you said you felt Meir Kahane was in the room, I hear you. It's not Meir Kahane just in the room anymore. This is now, if Trump says
it's not Meir
Kahane. It's actually Meir Kahane is out of the room.
Right.
When it was Meir Kahane, none of us wanted it. Even Itamar Ben-Gvir has to pretend that he doesn't have a relationship with him anymore.
Right.
But here, now in Israeli society, if Donald Trump says that America is our moral North Star. If America makes this kosher, then it becomes kosher. And in Israel, it's like this fantasy of, because part of the Israeli fantasy is that we came to a land without a people, and then, we're a people without a land who came to a land without a people. And now all of a sudden it's actually coming true. They're going to be gone. And now it is morally permissible. What you said about Gantz is critical. It's not just Gantz, and it's Lapid, and it's also Yair Golan. None of them morally critique this, not one. The closest, Yair Golan says it's not practical. Yair Lapid says it's interesting, and my response I'll give in another few days. Really? There was no gut feeling that this is us? Because once America does it, this represents what we're allowed to be in the world.
Look, I think what you're saying is really important, Donniel, but I also deeply understand the response or quasi-non-response from both Yair Lapid and Golan. And I think that there's a moral dimension, but there's also the very practical dimension that this is the country that's holding us up in war. And if the president of the United States is being too pro-Israel, quote unquote, it places the opposition in a very complicated position. They have to function in two ways. In relation to the United States, and hopefully these people will be in power soon, and they'll have to deal with Trump, and they're very mindful of that. And they're also very mindful of their conversation with the Israeli public.
But that's the point.
Yes, it is the point, but it's a complicated point.
I appreciate that, but they're not making it even complicated. I wish this could be complicated. There's ways, like Netanyahu, he sort of figured out, I have to compliment Trump to the level that even Trump will be embarrassed. So then that's like Dayenu. Like Trump has to be embarrassed by how he is the messianic figure who's done everything and will do everything. Great, compliment him to no end and say, we have to look at these questions and maybe there's other solutions. Something.
I think everyone here was thrown off center, figuratively and literally. And it will take the opposition a little while to figure this out. And I'm glad that they didn't instinctively respond and denounce Trump. It requires, for now,
Fair
We
enough.
have to proceed with caution here.
Fair enough. I could appreciate that. But the immoral, the
No,
conversation.
it's devastating. He's changed the moral ground rules in this country from one press conference. And with Netanyahu standing there and grinning like an idiot.
Like smiling. You know, the guy from CNN, I forget his name, they asked him to analyze this, and he said, to see the prime minister of the Jewish people who were exiled and kicked out of their homelands, hearing somebody make a similar statement about another people and that he's sitting there smiling, the smile is what got him.
I think there is a very interesting question here about Trump's relationship with the far right. Because what Trump has done is launch the far right on a wild roller coaster ride. When Trump first came in and forced Netanyahu into the hostage deal, the far right was beside itself.
He's the enemy now.
And they said it, he's not the Mashiach, he's not the Messiah.
Right.
Now he's the Messiah again. What happens if in a couple of weeks he says, well, I've spoken to the Saudis and the Gulf states, and they say we can proceed if there's going to be annexation. And I guarantee you that's what he's going to say.
Or even something else. What happens if he says, I spoke, nobody wants to take them, no one wants it? Great, I wanted to
I tried. That's
and
right.
so you know what? I'm turning to the Emirates and the Saudis, so you take Gaza. Instead of America, you take Gaza without a transfer, and all of a sudden, just like the trade with Canada and with Mexico, the tariffs, here it was, I offered something, but at the end, what I got was maybe what I wanted from the beginning, or it's sufficient. I want the end of the killing, and then all of a sudden, you thought you were getting an empty Gaza, and now you have to deal with a political solution in Gaza.
And if the Gulf states and the Saudis say we'll only come in if there's a Palestinian authority there, then Trump will say, well, okay, I tried.
I'm okay with that. If you want that, I'm okay. And then all of a sudden, where's the
far right? The far right thinks that Trump is on board with their end goals. For Trump, it's all means. It's all part of a kaleidoscope, this shifting kind of image of what's possible. And then, well, that's not possible. Let's try this. He's entirely pragmatic. And that's the nice way of putting it.
Could I talk about this pragmatism for a second? Because I also was thinking about, what does this mean when you say to somebody, not 2 million people, doesn't matter than a people, say, I'm going to give you a great life. You're going to live somewhere. Where? I haven't worked that out yet. But I'm going to get you a new home. I'm going to build something beautiful, and your life's going to be great. One of the principles of our tradition is what's hateful unto you, don't do unto others. It's just a good rule of thumb to walk through life with. And one of the central ideas of Zionism and of the Jewish people is that identity is not built only by your capacity to consume. Israel was formed not in order to enhance the Jewish people's economic standing. It just wasn't, and it certainly is not the case now. We could live in many places. If I just want a bigger house, take my house, what I could buy for my house in Baca, in almost every place in America, 10 times the size.
When people used to ask my wife and I why we moved to Israel, we would say we moved to increase our standard of living.
That was the motive. But the whole Zionist ethos is to understand identity differently. That I'm part of a people, and that my identity is not just judged as a human being and as a people by how much I can buy, and whether I get a better house or a nicer view. Now, I appreciate that Gaza right now is a dysfunctional reality, but there's many ways to deal with that. But when you look at Gazans, when you look at the Palestinian people and say, I am going to help you because all I need to do is to improve your economic standing, is to forget the deep, profound national identity of Palestinians, their connection to the land, their connection to this particular space, their stories. What is it like when you actually think that it's plausible to look at a people and say, yeah, you're going to live in lots of 2 million people, you're just going to live in lots of little places, and don't worry, you'll get jobs, etc. There is something so morally corrupt in your way of looking at people. It's one thing you want to do a real estate deal, but when you do a real estate deal with a people, your vision of them has flattened the complexity and the depth of how they see themselves. So Israeli society, why this is such a dystopia, is that when Israelis start looking at Gazans and argue, oh yeah, well listen, it's moral, I'm helping them. What does it mean to be, how are you looking at people? What do you sense are your moral responsibilities to people? And the big part of this conflict is that neither Palestinians in Gaza or Israelis, Jews, and Israelis in particular, are willing to recognize the complexity of each other's identity. You either say, I'm an alien here and go back to Europe because you have no connection to here. Or, you're just looking here in Israel, in Gaza, you have a better economic position than you never, and now I'm going to give you something even better. Who wouldn't leave? There's a moral corruption in flattening the way you appreciate the complexity of the interests and the needs of another human being. And hearing this president talk that way, and then feeling Israelis buy into it, for me, that's like almost the greatest aspect of this dystopia.
One of the great complexities of our personal dynamic is your passion is the moral conversation. And my passion is, what is this going to do for Israel, for our security, for our safety? And we indulge each other and we dance with each other, but we also keep shifting and pulling the conversation in our direction. So I want to now pull this in the more concrete direction.
Great. I feel I've said my piece.
And I really appreciate what you said, and I'm with you. But the political dimension here is that in some ways, this is a clarifying moment, and not just in negative ways. I saw a statement from Hillel Nair, who is the head of UN Watch, and really one of the heroes of the Jewish people in this time, someone who's out there fighting the lynch mob at the UN every day. And he said, okay, if it's immoral to move a rooted people, then why is the UN still referring to them as refugees? They're living in their land. Why they're either a people in their land or they're refugees. Choose. And I thought, exactly right. And we shouldn't be ignoring the practical implications of the strange spotlight that's being focused now on this whole question of Gaza and the Palestinians and indigenousness and our relationship with them. And here I want to go back to the far right, because the far right, I think, is setting itself up for a fall. And this is also a positive consequence, potentially positive consequence of this. Trump, very interestingly, and this wasn't commented on anywhere that I saw, Trump was asked, what about settlements in Gaza? And he said, no settlements. Why not? You're going to empty it out. Well, why not? Because I guess settlements don't go with a Riviera.
Exactly. It's like, I want casinos. You think I want a bunch of these orthos running around with their goats? Unless it's a tourist site,
So, there's something here about the stupidity of the far right. They latch on to these saviors and to these historic openings that actually they are fundamentally misreading. And so that's a positive side of this.
So why did they do that?
Because they do what all extremists do. And when it comes to extremists, I wrote a doctorate on, in my own life, I could write a doctorate on it. Extremists impose the world that they want to see on the world that is.
As it is. Yeah. That's a beautiful. The world that they want, they're constantly looking for self-validating and reaffirming possibilities. So if we're talking about
dystopias and utopias, they impose on a reality that is inimical to utopias their idea of a perfected world. And it doesn't matter if they're coming from the far left, the far right, they commit the same mistake over and over again. And what's so extraordinary is literally 2 weeks ago, they were denouncing Trump as the Antichrist, and now suddenly he's the Mashiach again. So without any self-awareness, this is the beauty of an extremist. You live in the moment, and whatever the moment seems to validate in your worldview, you seize on.
And you should see, by the way, because you know that I scan all the newspapers. Every single major newspaper in Israel, has already written, including the right-wing ones. So,
The sane right-wing
the
ones.
sane ones, like Israel Today, which is actually a great newspaper. And from Times of Israel...
It became.
From Times of Israel to Ma'ariv to N12 to Jerusalem, even Jerusalem, but everybody, this is not going to happen.
I've been reading the social media of Trump's camp and the responses to Trump's plan. People are outraged. They're saying, this isn't what I voted for.
Oh, interesting. From the other side here, the people on the far right, their news sites, they're the only ones who are saying, oh, it's like, wow, this is a self-evident, this is a plan. Everybody else is saying this is crazy. Now you're saying even
the MAGA world is not going to accept American soldiers dying in Gaza.
This is also part of the bizarre.
It's a fantasy.
Yeah, like here it is. Who's going to put, as you imagine, how do you move 2 million people? Assuming, of course, they're going to want to, because all they care about is having, a nicer painted house or a little this and another car.
They won't want to move, and there's no one who will take them.
And even if they want, how are you going to get them? What is the operation? Who's going to be Israeli troops? We're going to start putting people on boats. Americans. The whole thing is insane.
But
those ideologues are still, they're the only ones who think this is great idea.
Donniel, one of the themes that we've discussed over the last however many months since the war began was this sense of unreality of this time. The press conference last night was the culminating moment of this surreal experience. It was so detached from reality. And you know who knew it? Netanyahu.
You saw his body language?
He knew it, of course.
Unfreaking believable.
So what was he happy about? Here's my reading. He's standing there beaming, and he was really happy last night. He knew that this press conference gives him another year in office with the Israeli public. His government has now bought a lifeline. And he is now going to be seen by large numbers of Israelis, including many Israelis who dislike him, as, indispensable. He's the guy who can talk to Trump. Who else can possibly talk to him? And, I had this moment in the press conference when he's praising Trump, and he says to him, wow, look what you've done in 2 weeks. Who can imagine what you'll do in 4 years? And I felt embarrassed then. Because what has Trump done in the last 2 weeks? He's launched a witch hunt within the FBI. Imagine if Netanyahu did that, and we know he wants to do it, in the Shabak, the Shin Bet. He's launched a witch hunt against the Justice Department. He is dismantling American institutions. And I didn't really believe that American institutions could be so weak, could be so malleable. And because in his first term, he wasn't able to touch, in a fundamental way, American institutions. And this is what Netanyahu is praising. Wow, look what you've done in 2 weeks. And what he's really saying is, I wish I could do it, but those lunatics in my country won't let me.
As we bring this podcast to an end, there's one more point I wanted to share. We call this Trump's dystopia. And in our tradition, we divide people's inclinations into two. You have good inclinations and you have bad inclinations. And when it comes to the fantasy of a Gaza clear of Gazans, for many Israelis, it combines both their good inclinations and their bad inclinations. The desire to be safe is not a bad inclination. The desire to somehow have a solution for an area that, remember, in Israel, part of the reason why Trump's plan is taken more seriously is because there hasn't yet to be a serious plan talked about by anybody. So here it is, we don't know. So the choice is between the status quo, someone's changing it. So I can understand, and even for a moment, I appreciate it. What does it mean that we don't have that fear anymore? And when we're talking, because we know we're not just talking about a terrorist group, we're talking about a society that has embraced hatred of Jews. Not all of them are killers, and it doesn't mean they don't have rights, but the hatred of Jews is a broad...
It's become normative.
It's normative in Gaza. So to expect, oh, wow. And so for my security, but the evil inclination of forgetting the consequences or not taking into account the consequences of what does it mean to see another people a certain way and to actually take seriously the possibility of moving 2 million people out of their homes. Not to speak of international law. If you want to know, we didn't commit, this is genocide. This literally is genocide. That's what genocide is to have the intent to eradicate a society.
Or ethnic cleansing.
It's both of them. So if we're talking about what this is...
Not to nitpick about genocide.
It actually is genocide, because this is what it doesn't have. You are
doesn't have to be mass murder.
Not at all. Genocide is not a function of how many people you kill. It's about whether you make the ability of that people to continue to live in part or in total as an independent entity. You're wiping out this. What it's going to mean to what does it mean to your Israeli citizens who are Palestinians? All of that, you just forget all of it. And one rule of, like, when is it your evil inclination or when is it a good inclination? It's the difference between a dystopia and a utopia. Utopia is about creating a world where the best of what you aspire for is implemented. But when your utopia is creating a dystopia for somebody else, beware. Beware. Beware, you're forgetting something. And what part of your soul you need to activate. And Trump, I didn't want him, as I said last week, I don't want him as my prime minister. This vision of people in the world and the way you move and that's not the Jewish people. And this is a practical dystopia. It's also a moral dystopia. And even though we have these desires, we have to know that we need a utopia that's utopia for everybody, not a utopia for me and a dystopia for somebody else. Anything at all on any issue about this, about Trump and
Donniel, what you just said was so beautiful. Let's end with that.
We'll end there. No Iran.
Next week. Remind me.
Okay, my friends. This is where we are. We're day 488. We're 79 of our families not home. We're in some limbo of a ceasefire. What we didn't talk about is, what is this going to mean to the hostage deal? If I was Hamas, why would I even be inclined to continue? We'll have to see this Shabbat. 3 more people are supposed to come home. Are they going to keep it up? Are they not? How do they function in this Trump universe? We don't know. And there's so much uncertainty, so much chaos, and so much potential for misdirection and for practical and moral failures. And consequences are great. My friends, thank you for listening. Nancy, thank you again so much for sponsoring this episode. And we should have a good week. I don't even know what that means right now, but maybe the words are enough. Thank you.